I'm Michael Ashman. This is a presentation on mnemonics done for Curriculum 7007 for summer 2022. Now I'm going to assume that you can read, therefore I'm not going to read every slide to you. Part 1, a broad overview. Well, here's their definitions from mnemonic. Mnemonics from Merriam-Webster, which is a technique for improving memory, and the rest. This one is the longer version, which gets into all fun stuff, which tells us it's based on the Greek mindful. Define and continue. Mnemonics are popular elaborate methods. This is from our textbook, and they take many forms. A quick history or something from prehistory. We know it goes back to ancient Greece from the things, which gives us 3,000 years. Now, from some rabbinic studies, we know this shows up in the Hebrew language all of 5,782 or 83 years ago. So it's almost 6,000 years old right there. And if we bring in the Chinese use of memorable poems and caricatures and as such, we then get ourselves almost a 7,000-year-old history. In short, it's using something easier to remember and recall something harder. It makes use of short-term memory, more accurately our working memory, to aid in the encoding of information in long-term memories. The key idea is the association allowing for elaboration, and strategies can vary from charts to acronyms, which we're going to see a lot of acronyms. And this is from our own textbook. Supportive learning theories for mnemonics. Bloom's taxonomy has remembering as the base of everything. And from that, if you can't remember it, you can't apply higher order thinking to it. So a lot of people seem to think that the basic memory recall things are not worth teaching. Yet if somebody can't remember the vocabulary, it all gets very difficult very quickly. Elaborative encoding becomes the next part, where the more memorable the association, the stronger the link as far as all that goes. And it's been shown with Leeds, was talking about at medical schools, they're now teaching active mnemonic training to aid in diagnosticians doing their jobs correctly, because if you can't remember everything, you're going to make the wrong things, and we got a lot of diseases out there. So a lot of medical schools are having formal training in memory. Some of the more important mnemonic concepts is acronyms, which we mentioned before, where you use one thing to substitute for another, like NASA or an FBI. The book I think used is SMART and COPES to explain. I think SMART is searching, monitoring, assembling, rehearsing, and transferring. And the COPES is the conditions, operations, products, evaluation, and standards. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, who's for getting the order of operation right in math. Then we have to encode this. This is the association. Then you have your cognitive conditions, which go with organizing and note-taking, and task conditions, which are external to the student. We, the teachers, put them on there, which help, but, little kids sometimes need to be pushed where they need to go. Our working memory, of course, we've learned in our book, is what the brain is actually dealing with at a time, because the short term and the registries have less than a second on. Long-term memory is what you last for a lifetime. And this comes from using of rehearsal and repetition, which are techniques. Writing on the board 100 times does work. It's just boring as can be. But if you get the proper visualization and visual aids, this can go much faster and be much more powerful learning. Information processing theories, learning is encoded into the long-term memory. That is the memory of it. Self-regulation is learning how to monitor and direct our own actions towards a goal, such as like you want to learn how to play baseball or golf, and you are the one making these things. And metacognition is thinking about thinking. But the students make their own acronyms, and this has been shown by Tullis and Frodorf to be the strongest connections when they make the associations, because what you and I think are good for them may not be what they think are memorable. It's suitable for all learners. One of the studies found out that it actually improves the hippocampus of the brain, and like improving muscle tone or actually building muscle on an athlete can last for a lifetime, building up the brain has been shown to last for years after the development. So, you build up the brain muscles, it works. Now, for diverse learners, also found that age and affects the hippocampus, and as people get older, it starts to shrink or have other functioning things. But the use of mnemonic devices, even the table, and given enough extra time to deal with it, in a few extra moments, which is keeping with special population teaching, for the processing, older adults whose hippocampus is going through some, I hate to say the word decay, but not up to what it was before, can keep up. They just need a moment or two because a lot of the old memories go away from disuse. But if you keep associating with new things, you keep it up, as well as learning new information. That's why I say a lifelong learner actually is an important thing to be. Mnemonic advantages. This is the only slide I have on that, and we have a lot of disadvantages. Obviously, they work. They got a 7,000 year or prehistory usage of being successful. Listing basic associations, you can learn entire musical scores, can all be done with mnemonic techniques and improve student engagement, which improves your long-term memory. Listing shorts, but it offsets the next slides. It also, by using the effective things, aided with suicide prevention using that SHORES acronym. So, emotions and memory have a thing that go together, and if you use it right, it can help you in many ways. Now, we have some mixed results, such as in the Crawford, where they deliberately used bad memories to repurpose them to help remember long things. This was done as part of a study of people wanting to preserve certain natural habitats, and they used their bad memories to help them remember all the stories. Then we have emotional involvement can also be a mixed blessing, as their negative associations with unpleasant events can be counterproductive. It can be shown to have a degradation effect on recall as far as that goes. So if you're happy, you know it is better. But also, if you invoke bad memories deliberately, it might make you very tough in negotiations, but it might have other counterproductive emotions. So you got to be very careful how you use emotional connections. Other disadvantage, it's not a cure-all. You teach somebody how to memorize a list of 1,000 teams. It doesn't make them any wiser. It just means they can recall things. The kid can spell but can't remember to get under an umbrella in the rain. It's time sensitive. The registries in our brain have a short amount of time they do it, less than a second. Then you have your working memory. If you don't get that process quickly enough and start associating there, it will not go well. Langle found out that criminals who make up stories to get out of a crime are strongly motivated. You got great involvement there. But since it's not a real memory and they're trying to make an artificial story, the lack of detail shows up on repetition compared to a true memory as far as that goes. Even the passive observers uses all your senses. So you can't make something fake pass for something real for too long, but mnemonics do help you to remember a lot of things, including the made up. Disadvantages. Obviously, the emotions, PTSDs, and undesirable effects can happen because trauma teaches quite well, just as well as happy emotions teach quite well. Unfortunately, corporal punishment is not, or actually, fortunately, corporal punishment is not allowed, but we've all learned by burning our hand in the stove as a kid, and hopefully you don't do that anymore. But we have to remember that's also a mnemonic device. That's just not the one we want to use. Educator bias. You have some people who just seem to think that, well, since it's the bottom level of Bloom's, it must be bad. We have to do higher order thinking only. Once again, if they can't remember the list and they can't remember the definitions, they can't use them. Human biology has been about the same for 100,000 years. This seems to be going back a long, long time because it works. Memorizing lists, singing songs, making associations helps us remember. We're built that way. Disadvantage, academic mnemonic processes is not instinctual and must be taught. This means it is subject to teacher bias and time constraints. Some people think it's not in the curriculum. The reality is we have more types of mnemonics. Once again, we have our acronyms. Then we have sentence mnemonics, where you use a sentence to remember something larger. As far as like I said, the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally to help me remember the order of operations. We have extended narratives and paragraphs, poems, and rhymes to help remember history. A lot of the Middle Age history was brought down orally. Several cultures have an oral tradition where they make songs and rhymes to remember it all. And of course, we know that songs can teach a lot. I mean, what about Bruno has 35,000 items in it, and when my students tell me they can't remember the 800 from my class, and yet they can tell me all of, well, we don't talk about Bruno. They figure out maybe songs are a good way. The big three that come out of the textbook are using keyword associations that sound similar to rhyming and stuff there. Then we have our loci, the Roman room technique, where by visualizing a room, you implement many parts of your brain. And with that, it improves your memory and retention. Not to mention, you can make a huge narrative on this. You enter a house, you see the closet on the left, you see the closet. Open the closet, you see the coat, what's in the pockets. And each item could be something that helps you remember a longer story. The rumor is that in the Roman times, when they wanted to do a version of a filibuster, because there's only certain hours they could vote and they had to have so many people there, somebody would get up and give a speech that would last 3, 4, 5 hours, but they weren't allowed to have notes, and that was how they did it. Pegword is similar to keyword, but it contains the element of the loci. Later on, when I give my example, you'll see that I use a bit of the keyword in pegword along with the acronym. Songs are a special category, and people learn. I mean, some people learned all the states by a song, or of course the alphabet. And when you get lost, you sing the ABC song for alphabetizing something. Acronyms are so important, I gave them their own slide, which all make use in all of these other evaluation techniques, or not evaluations, but memorization techniques. Start with the acronym. Revisiting table 10.4 from our text, we have rehearsal, which includes repeating information and underlying summarizing. The elaboration, which makes use of imagery and the classically associated mnemonic devices like acronyms, sentences, narrative stories, peg words, the loci, questioning, note-taking, all come under that. Organizing, which once again repeats some of the classical techniques, as well as grouping and outlining, as well as and mapping, and under the definition of improving memory, this is legitimate as far as calling this a mnemonic device. Then we have monitoring the self-questioning, which gets back to our mention before of the shores, and the effective coping with anxiety. So with monitoring effective, you can make use of the mnemonic devices to see, do you understand and did you question it and re-elaborating, not to mention the metacognitive, thinking about thinking. And the effective is making use of a mnemonic device when you're having a bad day. Relevant literature throughout the presentation. As you notice, I have a long list here. Now I've discussed our textbook and the Tullis and Frondorf, which is the loci method. Then we have the textbook also mentions that. Then we had, what do we see we got? Studley, which is reducing the suicide. Rhodes and Greens remind us of being able to rattle off a long list doesn't make you any wiser. Pagan, who brings us the sad news that emotions, in effect, memory, if you're sad, it causes degradation of memory. Norby, who lets us know the emotion can be a three-edged sword and you can manipulate them, but it can make memories good or bad, because the happy memory is easy to good, but unfortunately so is the sad. And we have Martin Contreras, who shows us it goes back to the time of Israel. And then we have Leeds, who says it's alive and well at medical school, or if it's not, it needs to be, as far as that goes. Lang reminds us memories fade with loose details, which is why we catch criminals when we ask them to say the same story over and over. It breaks down. Foster and Giovanni tells us the mnemonics work at any age, and it's use or lose it. And Crawford tells us that painful memories can be repurposed to aid in recalling. So it's not all bad. And this just goes to show that mnemonics can be used with any age or group and population group. Now for our instructional scenario. Written reports or assignments are needed. That's what I was doing. I'll let you read it for a second. Instructional context. We've all had to have somebody do a report. The presentation I'm going to do now to language arts is going to look like the 5-step paragraph. It's repurposed along the scientific there. But it's more than just doing memorization. My instructional goals for this quick lesson is have the students be able to recall the steps in a common version of the scientific method. And the headings change, but the body stays the same. Provide them a template to write a report, because many of them can't handle the freedom of not having strict guidelines, and have it be able to match up to a gradable rubric so we can assess this. Says it all. That was the start of the presentation I use in my class a lot. Sometimes it's easier to something that's easy to remember helps you remember more complicated things. Your mnemonic device. Over the last few thousand years, the scientific method isn't necessarily the science. It's a problem-solving technique useful to remembering all the parts and provide a pattern to do this. We call it the scientific method because usually applied to science. The one I'm using is the acronym PREACH, Purpose, Research, Experiment, Analysis, Conclusion, Hypothesis. And we have the following slides that go with it. Purpose. This ultimately is, why are we doing this? Every textbook I look in will say something slightly different, but eventually they use the words observation, objective, problem. But ultimately they're saying, why am I doing this? Next is research, which is basically, what do we already know? So we're either confirming it or we don't research something we've already done or redo it. We don't want to start at zero. Now, the next stage should be hypothesis, but preach doesn't sound right if you put the letters in the wrong spot. So we have the experiment. This is the do it part, which includes the procedure. Most people seem to think the procedure is the experiment. It's whatever I do to test the hypothesis. Maybe I have a hypothesis that everybody loves chocolate ice cream. I ask some people, is chocolate your favorite? And find out that some people don't do it, okay? My process was asking the question. My hypothesis is everybody loved it. But this is where that goes. And it doesn't matter if I was right or wrong. I just want to find out an answer. Data goes here. Duh, what do you think? This is also where the math examples go and where you do your calculations. And eventually you say, was it right or wrong? Not as the conclusion, but what does the data say? Then from there you get your conclusion. Was the hypothesis supported or refuted? Why do we know the answer? Then we have to evaluate the experiment. Was it a good experiment or poorly done? Could have been done better? What was bad about it? Like my ice cream example. I asked if you like chocolate. Maybe I should have asked, what's your favorite ice cream? Which leads to a better way to do it because the scientific method is an iterative process. You do it over and over until you get it right. The hypothesis, which could have been stage 3, but cut and paste is your friend, is what was your educated guess? Was it right or wrong at the end? That ends that quick example. And we have the phaser strategy right here where I talk about the preach model is known as a mnemonic device. And it's sort of a combination of using the loci method, the peg, with an mnemonic device. So we could call it sort of the peg method here, but it makes use of both to associate getting things from the long term to the short term to long term. And if you remember preach, you can remember the steps. And there's a whole lot of steps within the steps. Now, for objective 2, we're going to see if we can remember how to convert from one unit to another by using the phrase, King Henry died unexpectedly from drinking chocolate milk. Now, after learning the order of the lessons, then we can get to the math. But if the kids cannot remember what the units are, this doesn't do us a whole lot of good. They'd have to know if they go up or down. So this is what our purpose here. Eventually, we're going to have them try to make this poster. But what happens is we have your base unit, that's the unexpectedly, right? And we have king, which is kilo, Henry, hecto, died from deca, right? Unexpectedly for the unit of the base, drinking from deci, chocolate for centi, and milli for milk. And you either multiply or divide by 10 from each one to go up or down. Very short lesson, but very, very powerful. And I've had students who learned it in 6th grade, and I saw them again in 12th, and they still knew it. The whole strategy of this is, if you can have them repurpose it, they can. A lot of kids come up with King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. It's only a subtle change, but they think it's theirs. And you have them make a poster out of the silly phrase, which brings in all kinds of other learning activities. But the whole thing starts with a simple mnemonic device. Now, part 3 here is the end of the video. I just included the references and all that stuff, so hopefully I'm not out of time yet. But if you lost the references, here's the chart and the rubric for grading the written report. Here's the mnemonic handout for letting you know what the big points are here so you can follow along, or if you got lost what the biggies are. Here's the references, and thank you for your time.